The ANC met last night following the news of an arrest warrant for its Secretary General Ace Magashule being confirmed. It's not yet clear what came out of that meeting. Magashule is the most senior ANC official to be arrested in relation to fraud and corruption. His arrest comes amid a declaration by the party that those charged with corruption should step aside. Magashule is implicated in a 250 million rand asbestos tender fraud, which was given the go-ahead while he was still Free State Premier. He's expected to appear in court on Friday. Let's not hear from our senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo to tell us more on this. Ziyanda, very good morning to you. A really significant matter this is. Ace Magashule is essentially the longest serving ANC provincial chairperson, in charge for close to 2 decades now. And it's been a bumpy ride. There have been allegations after allegations from as early as 1996.
Most certainly, Mpo, and I think it's important then to reflect on the political career of Ace Magashule as he prepares to hand himself over to authorities on Friday, and he will be appearing in the Bloemfontein Magistrate's Court. Of course, Mpo, as you've already alluded, if we go all the way back, Ace Magashule was a founding member of COSAS in 1979, and just to look at a struggle history, whilst as a student, he was charged with high treason in 1982, and then he was subsequently detained several times under the Internal Security Act, and then Magashule was also held in solitary confinement for 9 months in 1985, and so and then we fast forward to 1994, where he was appointed as the ANC chairman of what was then the Northern and Southern Free State regions, and then they were combined, and he became the chairman of both. And Magashule was mentored by the likes of Chris Hani and the late Mam Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and as you've already mentioned, he is the longest serving ANC provincial chairperson. And if you look then at his tenure as ANC provincial chairperson, he served in many capacities in the provincial government in the Free State, whether it's in economic affairs, transport, agriculture, and arts and culture at that. But as you've already mentioned, during his time as Free State Economic Affairs MEC in the early 1990s, there was a damning report by the then DG Stye, who claimed Magashule illegally established 2 NPOs and deposited nearly 6 million rand into their accounts. And the then Premier, Mosiwa Teralikota, relieved Magashule of his duties, citing insubordination. That's just one of the instances, in which Magashule was implicated in corruption. So it's been many years of Magashule being implicated, but nothing really happening. And on the political front, Magashule in that particular province was snubbed twice by former President Thabo Mbeki, and Magashule became then only the Free State Premier in 2009. That was after the Polokwane conference, and so thereafter, he became ANC Secretary General. But I want us to actually also then look at what Magashule has said over the years, but more importantly, in a recent exclusive interview that he did with politics editor Sibungalo, in which he had said about the issue of allegations, that if he faced allegations, he wouldn't step aside.
A member of the ANC is entitled to be treated like a citizen. Fairness, the rule of law, the law of natural justice is what you and I expect. You just come tomorrow and say Magashule was involved in this, and therefore I must step aside. I will never do that. I will never. I must be treated like all South Africans. And that's why we must guard against the resolutions of our conferences. Because as far as I remember, the conference resolution we took was that until you are found guilty by a competent court of law, the universal principle, you are innocent until proven guilty. And out of your own consciousness, you can actually step aside.
Right, as we take a look at that bite coming out of a very resolute Ace Magashule, Ziyanda, saying that he will never step aside. Of course, it brings us to a very important part. He speaks about resolution. And despite this resolution that those charged with corruption have to step aside, the ANC right now, Ziyanda, is essentially playing a wait-and-see game, really not doing much right now. But it talks to the significance of this matter tabled around the 23rd of August by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's talk about this resolution titled, "Let this be a turning point in our fight against corruption."
Well, Paul, you'll remember when the allegations of COVID-19 related corruption, in particular when it came to the purchasing of personal protective equipment, there was a lot of outrage from the public, especially when allegations were leveled against presidential spokesperson Khosela Diko and Health NEC in Gauteng, Bandile Masuku. And so President Cyril Ramaphosa, in an unprecedented move, might I add, directly sent a letter to ANC members, 7-page letter on the 23rd of August, where he was actually speaking about this, Mpo. And, you know, when he penned this letter, Mpo, he actually was speaking about the fact that, you know, he reflected on the outrage over the allegations and really saying that, you know, the mistrust between, this displayed rather the mistrust between Ramaphosa and those working in Luthuli House, because the president sent this letter directly to ANC delegates and wasn't through the Secretary General's office. And in that letter then, of course, he said he understood where the outrage was coming from, Mpo, and of course reflecting on his own spokesperson, Khosela Diko. And then the president being very specific then about the 54th National Conference, in which it decided to deal decisively to dismantle state capture networks and to deal with the scourge of corruption. And so when he went on to cite this resolution, he also then touched on the restoration of the integrity and independence of law enforcement agencies, and Paul, which is a very important point then, because we've already seen the allegation coming from Magashule supporters that the law enforcement agencies are being used for political gain. But here are some quotes. He says, "We must acknowledge that our movement, the African National Congress, has been and remains deeply implicated in South Africa's corruption problem." And I remember at the time, and Paul, this letter actually sparked outrage by some within the ANC. I actually even remember at this particular point in time that former President Jacob Zuma also then responded to this letter. But Ramaphosa also went on to say that we cannot, as the ANC, rightfully call ourselves leaders of society if we fail to lead the people in eradicating corruption from our own ranks. And that is actually quite clear and is alluding to what the Secretary General will be facing, and says those charged are required to insulate the African National Congress from reputational damage arising from their personal challenges by stepping aside while their cases are being heard. And I can tell you that this is something that is part or was part of the discussions that took place at the ANC's meeting yesterday. And of course, Paul, we know that the Secretary General, the only other body that could suspend him is the ANC's NEC. And he also goes on to say every cadre accused of or reported to be involved in corruption practices must account to the Integrity Commission immediately or face you know, disciplinary processes. And you know, these are some of the issues then that would likely be discussed in an ANC NEC meeting, because as you know, the Secretary General would have ordinarily been the one to suspend you know, members who are implicated in corruption. But in this case, he is the one who's now been implicated and charged. So we are expecting that an ANC NEC meeting will be called, a special one, to deliberate on this particular development.
Absolutely. As we speak, the ANC has just released a statement saying that Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte and Treasurer General Paul Mashatile will this afternoon, in fact, address the media on the outcomes of the meeting of the national officials around the latest developments within the movement. A really significant one there, Ziyanda.
Most certainly, Mpo, and I mean, it brings me to my next point about what the ANC is going to now have to say about its last ANC NEC resolution, which said then, of course, that those implicated in corruption must step aside. They actually endorsed Ramaphosa's letter on the 23rd of August, and they essentially said that in the event then, that someone is charged or formally charged serious crime or who's charged with serious crimes, rather, they should step aside from leadership positions in the ANC. Now, as I've already mentioned, it will be very interesting because it's the ANC NEC then that's empowered to suspend Magashule. So will Magashule voluntarily step aside? Well, we'll have to hear later on this afternoon, Mpo.